And Ian, if you were going to deign to give James Dyson a piece of advice, I mean, having looked and studied and talked to him, I realise this is a sort of a dangerous prospect.
You're listening to a freshly baked podcast from Research Talk. For much more inspiration on a huge range of topics, visit us at researchtalk.co.uk. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm pleased to say that this podcast is sponsored by Mr. Web, the global market research news and jobs website. So please take the time to visit them at mrweb.com. And now, on to the show.
Hello everyone, this is John Kieran, Chief Juicer at Brain Juicer, and I have the pleasure of being in conversation with Ian Carruthers, author of 2 books, the first of which was How to Move Minds and Influence People, a remarkable way of engaging and persuading others, which I have to admit to not having read. However, I have read the reviews on Amazon, and the shortest version is, this is about the power of stories and storytelling, to persuade people, which I can vouch for the fact that Ian has used to brilliant effect in his new book, Great Brand Stories, Dyson, the Domestic Engineer, How Dyson Changed the Meaning of Cleaning. Hello, Ian.
Hello, John. What John also hasn't said is that, because he's a modest sort, is that the book actually features some pretty good data, actually brain juicer data, that we use to get a snapshot of feelings about the brand or the business. So it was a little bit of a collaboration.
Well, that's kind of you to mention. I'll see if I can just shoehorn that in at various points as we're talking.
Marvelous, yes.
Ian, can we start with, why did you choose to tell this story?
At one level, it was a little bit of an easy shot because lots and lots of people have Dyson, certainly in the UK and increasingly all over the world. It's a well-known story, particularly the emergence in the UK. But what I wanted to tackle was a couple of things. One, what's happened to the business since, and whether they can actually become more than a one-product company, which is essentially what they are at the moment. And frankly, it gave me an excuse to write about lots of things that really interest me. So entrepreneurship, the art of innovation, the stamina of innovation, really. And also, in tandem with what you previously said, how the story of this brand and the story of this life is structured and why it's particularly appealing to us. Because what the story offers us is a view of the world in which the world can be made better by the use of engineering and by the use of products.
I mean, he's a new Victorian in that sense, isn't he? I mean, he is a throwback at some level to that kind of belief in progress. That was such a Victorian ideal, and the engineers and Brunel ruled the roost. Do you see that in him?
His personal hero is Embod Kingdom Brunel, who possessed that mix of wizardry, stamina, and frankly weirdness. They've got him to do some quite extraordinary things in the world.
But that's interesting that it's Brunel rather than Edison. He sometimes talks about Edison or the Edisonian development of his vacuum cleaner.
I think the parallel is both Brunel and, to a lesser extent, Dyson had very strong convictions about themselves as people. They were both self-confessed misfits. In fact, Dyson talks very openly about being a misfit. He says that misfits are not born or made, they make themselves. He says, I was a stubborn, opinionated child, desperate to be different and to be right. And then he says, and someone like that encounters only smaller refractions of the problems he will always experience. So he talks about himself as a bit of a misfit, but actually that powers what he does. And in many ways, the very powerful side of the man and his business does carry a darker side, which is that he's a bit paranoid, frankly, and goes into battle very frequently.
More of which will reveal the layers of the combative onion as we go. One of the things that really interested me on that point is Dyson has spent a lifetime crafting and getting very good at telling his own story, hasn't he? I mean, if there's marketing at work for Dyson, not that he sees it like that, it's almost that being the outsider, being the misfit, he's always had a kind of a narrative in his head, it seems, about how he fits in or doesn't fit in. But I don't know how consciously he does it.
I think he does it very consciously. When I met him, I did ask him, James, I could call him James because I was writing a book about him.
You and James, you're like that now.
And I said, say this thing costs £200. How much do you think people are paying for your story? And he sort of affected not to really know, but I think they're very cute about that. And I think that they do have a very clear idea about the fact that when you are buying a Dyson, clearly you're buying something that cleans your floors well and doesn't lose suction. But as importantly, you are buying a particular point of view about the world. You're buying the kind of qualities of his narrative. Is he a marketing maverick? Not really. I mean, the business does affect not to believe in advertising, although it does quite a lot of it. It does very, very consciously use PR. That's how he grew his first couple of businesses, one which was a sort of slightly dodgy speedboat, and the second one was the Ball Barrow.
The Sea Truck was his first one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sold to gangsters and the Israeli army, was that right? Or no, the Egyptian army. I can't remember which way round it was.
I didn't quite get what it was all about, to be honest, but it was definitely a speedboat with a different kind of design that was able to move fast and carry lots of gear. And funnily enough, it was the military who had the quickest applications for this. He flogged some, apparently quite innocently, as a 26-year-old to these two guys in Switzerland, and 2 weeks later they were firing up the Israeli coast on behalf of the Egyptian army.
Great.
It's all good. It's all good stuff.
But I wonder whether it's that narrative in James's head that enables him to survive what otherwise sounds horrific. 12 years of development, 5,127 different designs before the first, Dyson DC-1 comes out. How can you hang on to the dream?
I think it is that peculiar quality of the uber entrepreneur, I suppose. That combination of drive and frustration and really desperation to be significant in the world.
What, so you mean he has to kind of constantly be working on keeping being a misfit?
One of the chapters of the book is called The Productive Narcissist, and that's the only chapter title that Dyson themselves sort of quelled a little bit at. But it's actually a positive description, because in one sense a lot of entrepreneurs are a little bit narcissistic, and I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. It's very important to them to be significant in some way in the world, and it means that they will sacrifice and trade off things that the rest of us wouldn't. It's driven by a very rich internal narrative, which is populated by my need to be something in the world, and therefore I need a number of darker figures. I need enemies, I need malicious other vacuum cleaner manufacturers and rubbish politicians who won't back.
I know Steve Jobs has been described as a productive narcissist. People are amazed and inspired by him, but they're also people who have come out shredded by him.
Well, that's right. And I think we do encounter people who are charismatic, they're driven, they're often the founders of a particular business or agency. When we work with them or even go to work for them, there's a very explicit, well, not actually, a very implicit deal we enter into them, which is that we trade on some of the light and the energy that they offer us. At the same time, it puts us in quite an anxious place because we're busy trying to work out what they actually think of us. In the Dyson organization, and this was affirmed to me several times, there's something very liberating about thinking, what would James do in this situation? Because that impacts if you have to make a decision about something. So let's go for the right thing technically, let's go for the thing that's going to work in the long term.
Let's make it creative so it can be inspiring as a template, as something to follow.
At the same time, the other thing that everybody in Dyson or Apple or wherever it is are thinking is, what does James think of me or my project?
Right.
Or what does Steve Jobs think of me or my project? Or what does John Kieran think of me or my little project?
I always think it's fantastic.
Right behind you. But that can be quite difficult, because not in the sense of brain juice, because you sit next to John Kieran, you'll probably get to know what he thinks of you. But if you're in Dyson and you're employee number 453 and you've bought the Dyson thing, you love the notion, you've probably met him once or twice, you've bathed in that light, but actually you'll never find out what he really thinks about you. What's happening is, and this is why the senior team at Dyson and Apple and the places, one of their main jobs is to manage the company's expectations of the founder and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, what do they actually end up doing?
What you need is people around who are almost not quite the polar opposite, but who are managers and interpreters of that. So Martin McCord, in many ways actually was the most impressive person I met there, including James Dyson. Martin McCord is the CEO. His job is to help James to focus on stuff that will keep the company, moving forward and inventive. He gets to do the rest of the thing, which is to manage the business, manage other people's expectations, and I suspect do a lot of the kind of grotty work, which is about, well, actually, no, we're not going to pursue that particular project, we're not going to pursue that particular thing.
And did you get the feeling that there was, I mean, as much as you could tell, a respect from James Dyson of Martin McCord? And
absolutely. Because the whole thing about a productive narcissist as opposed to just a narcissist is a productive narcissist understands when he needs the right kind of people around him.
Because I was really struck, I mean, one of the bits in the book was when Martin McCord was interviewed by James Dyson for the CEO role. He sounds like a fairly sort of bluff Scotsman. He said, I've met a few argumentative people in my time, but James Dyson is bloody argumentative. And there was obviously the whole interview was that battering of heads, and it was like, could Martin McCord stand up to Dyson? Because presumably as the misfit, as the argumentative bugger, he almost wants people who are a bit like him or able to sort of stand their ground in order to find someone of equal standing, even if they're different.
That's right, and that's why a lot of entrepreneurs will come undone, because the managers that they know they need actually symbolize the constraints that they hate. A smart entrepreneur or a productive narcissist will know that they do need some order. So they bring in these managers to create the order they know must happen. But of course, they inwardly resent it. So,
yeah. I'm not laughing out of recognition or anything, no. No.
But the managers themselves, the people who come in, the Martin McCourts and the Will Whitehorns, for example, at Virgin, they need to have a very strong sense of themselves and their own competence. There are a fair amount of people around the world, in London and the West Country particularly, who have been in Dyson and left Dyson and feel pretty burned by the experience.
But when you were listening to their story, was there any sense that they wouldn't have missed it for the world, even though this was a painful experience?
Different people have different experiences because they make things like vacuum cleaners and washing machines, of which more later, and indeed a new, quite revolutionary electric motor. They make things that spin very, very fast. And actually, that's what the business is like.
Oh, really? Okay.
That sense of turmoil, of productive turmoil, is really quite close. And I mean, someone said to me at one point, an unguarded moment, someone quite senior said, the whole place is precious but very fragile, actually. There's a kind of maelstrom of activity there, and if you get caught up in that, it's easy to get caught up positively, but equally it's easy to feel you're just getting flung around by, something in a washing machine. The counterpoint to that is, of course, they're doing an awful lot of work, as they make the point, which is actually a lot of the engineering work is extremely dull.
Yeah.
It consists of going in, getting something wrong, thinking about it, trying it out the next day, getting it wrong a little bit less until at some point you get something.
But in that sense, it's the perfect metaphor, for the vacuum cleaner. The spinning is the interesting bit, and vacuuming isn't. Is it pure coincidence that if you think of some of his heroes, the steam engine, the spinning Jenny, there's a spinning metaphor in progress. There always has been.
Oh, yeah, indeed. And my experience, which I talk about sort of right at the end of the book, is when I did get my hour and a half with him, we started off talking about the vacuum cleaner, and he went into a very practiced, charming story about how it all works, and energy, innovativeness, and all that kind of thing. And I found myself thinking, oh God, I know all this, but I'm not getting anything. He might have sensed that as well. And he said, "Has Ian seen the motor?"
Right.
And I said, "No, I don't think I have," and because I don't know what you're talking about. Then he said, "Oh, he must see the motor." Someone came back in with this very small, shiny object, and he started talking about this motor that they've developed because they were really pissed off with the quality of the electric motors they had to use in their own vacuum cleaners.
Right.
So basically, he says, we've developed a completely different kind of motor, which is less than half the weight of the normal one. It's got 40% more power. It never wears out. And then he was off. He was into something that was actually live and alive in their business.
I think that's fascinating. My temptation, just to share with you, Ian, that at some point I was going to start at the beginning, James the bassoon player, the marathon runner, and then you follow the narrative through to the end, and let's say the motor is about the end. But it strikes me, if it's all right, that we should reverse it, because we can't see the future. We can't tell whether this is going to be the next great thing. And to me, that almost feels like, well, this was where he was with the vacuum cleaner. This is what people must have felt when he was sharing it with friends or investors.
Precisely.
And I sort of feel in this motor, it sounds terrific. It's half the weight, 40% more power, it's smaller, and it's obviously better, demonstrably, engineeringly better. What's he going to do with it? And do you think it'll work?
Who knows? And they don't know really. All they know is that they've got something that they absolutely believe in. The quality of that belief is really quite powerful. It's really quite enchanting. I think then I realized, what was the dynamic behind the success of the vacuum cleaner and behind the success of other very powerful stories of entrepreneurship and innovation. So why do we love these stories? Why has the Dyson story been successful? Why do we read novels? Why do we go to the movies? Because we're fascinated by seeing another human being in jeopardy.
If we just wind the clock back a little bit into history, their washing machine failed, and that actually makes it much more interesting to me, because I wonder how the current Dyson employees and investors, they're kind of looking vacuum cleaner success, washing machine failure, what about the motor? Is it a washing machine or is it a vacuum cleaner? I can't tell.
this is someone with the Midas touch. As we see in the book, there are a number of points at which the whole enterprise could have fallen over. In fact, if you went back before the launch of the vacuum cleaner, he didn't really want to be a vacuum cleaner manufacturer and entrepreneur. He wanted to be an engineering designer or a design engineer, whatever they're called. And he wanted to sell off the license for the vacuum cleaner so he could get a stream of money for it and go and do other things as well. So the story is kind of riven at several points by pure chance. But if you go back to your question about the washing machine was withdrawn from the UK market about a couple of years ago, having been in the market for, again, a couple of years. And headline, it didn't work. It was too expensive. It was the best part of $1,000. Which is kind of quite jaw-slackeningly expensive when the modal cost for something in that market is about 300 or 400 quid. And the main thing was, the really cool thing about the Dyson, as we put in the book, the killer experience, is when you use it for the first time, because it's transparent, you can see all the shit you've been living in, frankly. Right? So that's the key experience. So people go around, and of course the machine itself doesn't suck any harder.
It's obviously transformational, isn't it? There is a sort of a feedback loop which justifies your purchase or and everything else.
Exactly, and you see the stuff coming through, and you go, and you empty it, and you go around again, and it still fills up, and you think to yourself, goodness me, this is extraordinary, and you congratulate yourself psychologically on the fact that you have paid extra for it. So the whole notion of this experience was a very, very powerful one that brand could trade on. I'm not sure they consciously thought about it, but they fought very, very hard for the notion that it should be transparent, because all their suppliers, the John Lewis's and the Curry, said, "Oh, why don't you just put a little bit of smoked housing on?"
That's right.
People don't want to see that. No, they don't want to see that, but that's the point.
Yeah.
The washing machine didn't have that same kind of experience. There wasn't the transformation as you described.
I have a suspicion, talking about the see-through housing, the real reason it was see-through was because it was inherent in the actual magic of the machine. From James Dyson's point of view, I want you, the world, to see my cleverness. And actually the byproduct, luckily, was for the user a transformational experience. I'm conscious as an inventor that you do something that you feel is important, integral to the thing you're creating. And actually the way it's consumed by others and perceived by others can be quite different to the original reasons that you did it in the first place. It's a little bit random, if you like.
Well, it is. You cannot predict the effects, and that's what so much of the marketing consultancies and the management consultancies attempt to claim to this, is that it's okay, we can help you predict how the world is going to be.
Yeah. And
it's kind of illusory. So it's sheer expense, and it didn't have that kind of transformational experience. And actually, it was too big for most people. I explored this with a couple of people in the laundry business. Unless you've got a huge family, you don't need a washing machine that big, because of course you have to sift loads, but you can't just put everything in. But they'll be back with it, I'm sure. I suspect they'll be bringing it out in the US, a respect machine at a better price threshold, with a couple of other bits and pieces.
But I mean, to illustrate that, this is the point at which I shoehorn in our fabulous research. But to illustrate that point about people taking out a different message to the very thing that the vacuum cleaner is supposed to be, in Germany, when we asked people about Dyson, what's good about it, they actually said basically never clogs up and therefore has sort of permanent suction. Yep. Whereas in the UK and the US, it was kind of like, this is just a cool machine. It sucks better. It sort of is the NASA version of a Hoover. And there was no conscious or at least explicit understanding of the actual mechanism by which it's a better one.
It kind of makes Dyson mad, because they spend the entire life kind of, the marketing people, trying to explain people all about cyclonic technology and why it's better. Dyson, in this funny situation, because they're engineers, their very nature is to kind of make the world better by the use of technology and have people understand that. They're kind of hugely frustrated at the fact that people don't really get it, and they don't really understand it, but they're buying the stuff anyway, so still that's good. They kind of pretend that people are buying it because of the technology. But actually, if we were to kind of look at, as we were talking about earlier, Mark Earle's new thing about herd behavior and copying, people are buying it because they're copying everybody else.
Yeah, everyone else has got one. It's like, well, actually, that is the status symbol. You've got to have one of those.
Well, it is, and Dyson would absolutely hate that, but at the same time, they know it, because they wouldn't engineer it to look so good if it didn't. And we do explore in the book the nature of it as a status symbol.
In a moment, more on the Dyson story, including Dyson's motivations and quest for a legacy, parallels with fellow maverick Apple, and more on those David and Goliath battles. But first, if you're aiming a little higher in your own career and not already looking at Mr. Webb, how about slinging out your old habits? It's the giant of online market research job sites, listing most of the advertised jobs in UKMR and thousands more than any other site. Now, back to the conversation.
One of the things that I feel is obvious right the way through, I mean, your book and James Dyson's own autobiography and the whole narrative is failure. You know, you talked earlier about the dark side of the productive narcissist, but the dark side of this whole narrative, and it feels essential to the narrative, is failure.
Absolutely essential.
You know, the kind of vacuum cleaner success, washing machine failure, almost feels a good thing in Dyson's terms. I mean, I know it probably drives him nuts, but because actually failure is an essential part of eventual success.
I think there are a number of failures. There's the daily failures. He talks about engineering as an experience of daily failure. And there's hundreds of things that they have spent money on trying to develop that haven't gone anywhere, because if there's no market for this, or we can't make it properly, or there's literally hundreds of projects that they've explored and tried to make happen that haven't happened. I mean, that's just part of being what they are. So it's part of everyone's life commercially, but it's very difficult to embrace. The difficulty we have of embracing failure and talking about it, the testament to it, funnily enough, is some of these stories, some of the stories about entrepreneurs. We talk about here in the book about how the entrepreneur's story is the sort of modern version of an old tale, the old questing tale. You know, the knight would go and take the head off the dragon and, you know, therefore win the hand
Oh, I
of the
see.
bride.
What the hero's journey, sort of.
It is the hero's journey, and we love these entrepreneurs. You know, the Sunday papers are absolutely full of them. What we do in one chapter is examine what's going on here. The entrepreneur's story is a story of questing, but whereas previously in the old stories you could die because the dragon could take your head off, or the Black Knight would come and do this. Death here is actually symbolized by bankruptcy and failure and debt.
Well, and he is certainly, you know, almost literally a battler, isn't he? I mean, he's battled people over lawsuits. He's battled people, no doubt, internally. I mean, you know, he hates the big companies, and we love that story. The David and Goliath, isn't it?
Well, that's right. And what are you actually fighting for? I think what he's really fighting for is his right through patent to be seen as the company's right to be seen as the inventors of this. Now, no one can take that away from them. So that significance in the world and in the world of invention is there forever. And actually, that's why the business nearly went to the wall on several occasions, was because of just huge lawsuits where they were countersuing people who'd copied the technology.
That is an area we've got to cover. What is the eventual motivation? I mean, I'm conscious he's now Britain's 37th richest man, £700 million. You know, he's bought a big, very, in a way, ostentatious, but I mean, it's an old Victorian place, I think, hasn't he? It's slightly at odds, I sort of think, with the engineer who only cares about the engineering.
He's a human being, and what he's, you know, it is very much kind of like his Victorian forebears, because, you know, all the old country houses, you know, were bought by the great industrialists and redone by them. And what's he doing? He's finding an old house which is gone to seed, and he's redoing it as well. And you can dress that up in, you know, it's all engineering, but it's not, of course. And, you know, he's just accepted. He's now Sir James Dyson, so he's literally part of the aristocracy now.
And that's important to him, do you think? Does he feel like the poster boy for these values?
He's happy to be a spokesman for them. You know, he has just set up a new engineering design school, which he's funding in Bristol. But yes, of course, by making the machine so distinctive, by having his picture around an awful lot, by having these kind of iconic headquarters they have down in Malmesbury, by putting his own face on the advertising campaign that broke the back of it all in the US, clearly it's important to be seen and recognized at some level. Now, I don't know if that can ever be satisfied, that need. Just, you know, I don't know if it's kind of just a, you know, it's an insatiable need. But I don't think that's really driven it. You know, we do have, you know, the celebrity culture is full of people who are simply driven by the need to look significant. At least we have, you know, someone that significance is expressed through machines, literally, that he hopes will change the world.
Yeah, and constantly take risks to do so, unlike a lot of celebrity, which then just protect their image, you know, against, there's no risk at all. And about the school, this is down in Bath, isn't it? Because to me, you could see that as just a piece of philanthropy, but actually it feels something different. He's trying, again, start a revolution in the way education is done.
I think he is. I think it's very important to him to, you know, offer that kind of legacy. I think it's driven by two things. One is his own probably personal frustration at the quality of some of the candidates he's getting through. And the other thing, and this is, I mean, my take on a lot of this, is that what Dyson is doing is creating the conditions, because you've got to have mums, but it's lots of young engineers being given license to try and do things. I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to recreate the conditions that he himself experienced as a young man, which is to be given freedom, being mentored well, and being given a real kind of experience of having to engineer and then market and sell your own things.
Let's say 1950s is when marketing, formal marketing, was born in America, and the consumer is the start point, not the machine. And it feels like he's trying to, if you like, start the cycle again, and come back to engineering values as central, and that marketing, I know he sort of sees as a veneer. It's sort of, marketing is almost the enemy of good engineering.
It is interesting, because this is a book called Great Brand Stories, and it features a company that kind of self-consciously says, we're not a brand. They're quite cutely kind of recognizing that, something I agree with, I think the currency of branding and branding language is becoming rapidly eroded. I think that an awful lot of what we do now is about, as Russell Davis talks about, is we handle our brands. We don't sort of really kind of have beliefs about what they're meant to be doing in the world anymore.
Okay, yeah.
So Dyson's position is that what's happened is that because people no longer have any clear beliefs in their products and their own product superiority, branding is an exercise to disguise the fact
right. Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. So, what you're trying to do with the whole art and act of branding is just pretend. And in fact, both you and I have been, oftentimes I suspect, in workshops in climate control going, hang on, we have just wandered into the land of make-believe here.
Yeah.
Because what we're busy trying to do is second-guess consumers, invent emotions for consumers, attach emotions to the particular product that we have, end up in long arguments about whether the brand equity should be fun or funny, and kind of just disappear up our collective backside, and forget that what we're there to do in the first place, which is to make kind of decent stuff and sell it to people and satisfy them with it. But by any conventional definition, Dyson is a brand because it's a product which has a specific meaning, which is very carefully managed.
The irony,
at the same time, it's liberating not to think of yourself as a brand.
And I can absolutely see that. To me, the irony of this, though, just listening to you speak, and I'm nodding, thinking, yeah, I've been in too many of those workshops, is actually both exercises are engineering. It's like the brand conversation, the extreme version, is trying to engineer the end emotion of consumers, isn't it? I mean, it's so abstract, and it's totally focused on almost a deluded sense of manipulating the consumer's emotions. Whereas Dyson,
importance.
Yeah, and
important. That we're that important.
Yeah.
This can actually be done.
And I think Dyson's, I have to say, I think he's kind of got it right to go back to engineering the damn thing, the thing that will provoke those emotions. Don't worry, they'll follow. It's like, that'll come if you get this thing right. So it's like the focus of engineering is on the wrong thing in marketing often.
It is about the football team that spends all its time, watching the opponent's videos and how to anticipate that.
Yeah, it is. That's a lovely analogy, because I kind of think we already established earlier, I mean, Dyson doesn't always get it right. By focusing on the machine, on the thing, it doesn't always provoke the right end result, as we talked about with the washing machine.
If you'd listened really hard to the consumer research and the trade research about the washing machine, you probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. The point is, we've got this, great machine, let's get it out there. The flip side of this kind of quite positive drive and of energy and belief in what you've got is that you're going to get stuff wrong. So, for example, if we go back 6 months, they launched a product called the Airblade about 6 months ago, Dyson, and essentially it's a hand dryer. So we've all had that experience of standing in front of those machines in public places, spending 30 seconds watching our hands not really get dried by them,
blowing a bit of ineffective air over our hands.
So they've invented this new thing, which it's in many ways it's great. It uses half the energy. It dries your hands in probably half the time. I would imagine they claim 10 seconds rather than 30, but probably half the time. It's also quite astute because it puts the Dyson brand in the public domain, because this is the kind of thing that you see in public toilets, public restrooms, hotels, bars, that kind of thing. Right now, they don't know if it's going to be successful or not. All they know is they think they've put together a really good, robust, resilient piece of technology that will work well, and they're putting it out there.
Very good. And Ian, if you were going to deign to give James Dyson a piece of advice, I mean, having looked and studied and talked to him, I realise this is a sort of a dangerous prospect.
I don't know. I think probably I would say actually make your advertising a bit more distinctive, because I think their advertising looks like BMW. It's all black and sleek and that kind of thing. And I think one of the points that we pick up, because at the end of the book we do is kind of a very, here's a Dyson guide to marketing, and it's all about the notion of having a killer experience and the product being in charge. But we talk also about peopling the brand, allowing the brand to take on sort of human qualities by making it clear how those people in the business sort of author it for your benefit and for their own fulfillment. So the story was all about James Dyson. I think it would be kind of interesting now to see some of the other people in Dyson talking and speaking about what they do. One of the things, because the brand claims it's all about technology all of the time, I think it's in danger possibly of becoming a little bit too abstract and a little bit too black and yellow.
Well, the more and more work that's coming out is just saying that, look, advertising is pure emotion. Don't even make me think. If you make me think, it actually becomes less persuasive. And of course, the Dyson experience, the vacuum cleaner, leaves you with a pure emotional experience. I mean, you told me about people talking on websites and blogging about they get very excited about Dyson, and so it's obvious pure emotion. Whereas their advertising, I agree with you, is very engineering. It's rational. It's Germanic. And actually, it leaves you a bit cold.
What the advertising at the moment doesn't do is provoke conversation, and of course, conversation is what leads to copying, which is what leads to product take-up.
Yeah.
It was the conversations about the Dyson, particularly the conversation about, have you seen, look, mother, come and look at this.
Look at this.
Look, well, it's been on our carpets for the last, and people pick up Labrador fur and the dog died 10 years ago and all that sort of stuff. It's that link between a really powerful experience and the conversation that ensues because of it.
Well, I think even just telling the old story, isn't it? It's the battle against the giants. People would love that, in 30 seconds.
Of course, now they're the giants, you see. What they need to do is move there's another giant killing exercise to be done with this motor, because I suspect they have 0.0001% of the world motor market at the moment.
Yeah, it's parallel with Apple, isn't it? So the iPod, I mean, you can still be a huge company, but still somehow be the outsider, to be the challenger, and hopefully that spirit will remain. Reading the book and listening to everything you said here, I've just got to add a little bit to the end. So the recipe for entrepreneurial success: creativity, resilience, perseverance, determination, stamina, drive, imagination, courage, resourcefulness, self-belief, commitment, ability to go without sleep, and a touch of madness. And the bit I'd have to add, a touch of madness and productive narcissism, I think. The productive dark side.
I'd add to that was the Churchill one, which was success is the ability to go from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And
the other one, just to trade Churchillian, he was wonderful. It was like, if you're going through hell, keep going. Well, look, thanks, Ian. That was terrific. If you've enjoyed the conversation, you will love the book. Great brand stories. Dyson, the domestic engineer, how Dyson changed the meaning of cleaning. Ian's website, encounterbusiness.com. I've been John Kieran, Chief Juicer. If you're interested in us, it's brainjuicer.com. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another lovingly produced podcast from Research Talk. We love comments and thoughts, so send these to letmetalk@gmail.com. And remember to add us to iTunes so you never miss out on new shows. Visit researchtalk.co.uk to find out how. Thanks to music.podshow.com for the use of PodSafe music. Ciao.